Hi guys, today I'll be taking a look at this, the Fnatic Streak65 with Fnatic Speed low profile switches. Let's get started. Now for some background, Fnatic is an esports business. Their about page is literally all about esports and their achievements. In fact, they even flex about it on the box, so they seem to be pretty serious about all this. Now, they refer to their keyboard lineup as the Streak series. They have a full-size, TKL, and a 65% variant. However, they have a newer version of this keyboard called the Streak65 LP. It comes with PBT keycaps, a coiled cable, and sound dampening foam. But everything else, including the switch, remains the same. Pricing wise, this keyboard is on sale for £55 on Amazon at the time of this video. Now moving on to the switches, these are the Fnatic Speed low profile, and if it looks similar to you, that's because it is. These switches are based on the Krytox V2s, a low profile switch by Kale. Now that you know all that, let's move on to the keyboard characteristics. Now the base is made of plastic, and the top is made of aluminium, so in other words a very standard build for this kind of keyboard. In terms of dimensions, the keyboard is roughly 32 cm long, 10.5 cm wide and 4 cm tall with the feet extended. It also weighs 458 grams including the cable. However, the keycaps are thin, laser-ablated ABS. This is a cheap manufacturing method, but it's not great for any kind of longevity. Now, the stabilizers are custom molded by Fnatic. They come pre-lubed to reduce rattle, but my spacebar has an insanely loud rattle. Take a listen. So clearly that hasn't worked. Overall, it's a keyboard built to an average standard. Nothing really stands out that impresses me, but nothing also sticks out like a sore thumb. 5 out of 10. Now, as a modern gaming keyboard, it has some nice features. Firstly, the keyboard uses the Fnatic OP software, which, if it isn't bugging out, is a fairly straightforward software to use. All of your changes get saved on the keyboard locally, so there's no need for it to be opened in the background. Secondly, this is an esports centric keyboard. It has a competition mode, kind of like a sports button that you might have in your car. So to enable competition mode, you need to press FNC, which by default dims the lights and disables the Windows key, but you can configure what it does to your liking using the software. And lastly, while the cable isn't braided, it is removable, making it easy to replace. Plus, it allows you to store the keyboard in a smaller space if you're the type to carry your keyboard around. Now, those were its main features, but it does have more. This keyboard features N-key rollover, non-dedicated media controls, 2 additional RGB LEDs underneath the spacebar, and a removable customizable plate. However, before I conclude this section, I want to mention a few noteworthy downsides. Firstly, I mentioned that the Fnatic OP software is sometimes buggy, which wasn't the case at first, but for whatever reason, even though it recognized my keyboard, it wouldn't allow me to customize it any longer. I had to reinstall it to get it to work again. Secondly, the macro functionality is very limited. Let's say you wanted to execute the string, this is a test. Pressing the macro key executes it in the same speed you typed it in. Yes, you can adjust the speed, but they made it quite in a convoluted way, almost as if they're discouraging you from doing so. Otherwise, all macros work just fine. Overall, it has a nice set of features, but not much more than your average gaming keyboard nowadays. 6 out of 10. Now, I have to admit, this was my first time dailying a 65% keyboard, and I'm not really a big fan. The short shift key and a lack of a menu key are big downsides for me, but I think if they had separated the nav cluster a bit more, it would have been a lot better. Additionally, the loud, rattly spacebar stabilizer was quite annoying to hear. I was disappointed by it since my backspace and enter keys don't rattle at all. Moreover, the switches are very scratchy and are not 100% linear. They have a bit of tactility at the start of the travel, although these low profile switches don't actually feel all that low profile to me. However, on the plus side, the RGB LEDs are super bright. They shine through the keycaps perfectly, with the 2 additional LEDs underneath the spacebar providing even more light. The white LED underneath the caps lock also shines through the keycap just fine. Overall, if you're not used to this layout, it will take some time to get used to it, but besides that, it's a fairly standard keyboard otherwise. 5 out of 10. Now, this is still somewhat of a new keyboard, only being released in 2020, so it's gonna be hard to tell how reliable these will be. Plus, it uses Krytox V2 switches, which not many keyboards have. On the plus side, the newer V2 switches have dust proofing around the stem, which the V1s didn't have, so this should be more reliable than those. However, just like with many gaming keyboards, the RGB LEDs and the laser ablated keycaps will eventually start to wear down. The LEDs don't dim or shut off as seen in some keyboards, but at least the V2 switches are compatible with MX style keycaps. Overall, I don't see too many things that can go wrong with this keyboard mechanically speaking, and it should last for quite a long time. 8 out of 10. Now, these are currently on sale for £55 on Amazon, and I don't know of a keyboard that can match its specs for this price. In the upper range, the Keychron K7 Pro and K7 Max feature Hotswap and multi-mode connectivity, but for a price of £110. In the budget range, the Ajas AKL680 is a slightly bigger 68% layout for about £36. It also has multi-mode connectivity, but doesn't have programmable keys. Overall, I think the pricing is competitive. I mean, this keyboard lacks ground in some areas, but at least it's priced accordingly. 9 out of 10. Now let's move on to the switch characteristics. On-center key presses are noticeably scratchy with light tactility present on both the up and down stroke. Off-center key presses are very scratchy with noticeable binding and even more tactility present. Overall, they're very scratchy, bind quite a bit and have some sort of tactility for a linear switch. 3 out of 10. Now, according to Fnatic, these switches actuate at 45 grams at 1mm and have a total travel of 3.2mm. Now, as you can see from this voice curve I recorded, the Fnatic speed low profile were within its outline specs. However, they weren't very consistent. Switch 2, the orange line, and Switch 3, the black line, are noticeably different from each other. Switch 3 is around 5 to 7 grams heavier throughout its entire travel downstroke wise. However, they closely match in the upstroke around the minus 1.4mm mark, although I'm not exactly sure why. Now here it is compared to the Cherry MX Speed Silver. The Cherry switch is generally 3 to 5 grams lighter, apart from where the Fnatic switch dips between 0.7 and 1.2mm. Now here it is compared to the Accol POM Silver. Both switches start off about the same, but the Fnatic switch is generally heavier. Interestingly enough, they both have a similar travel despite the Accol switch being a full-size switch. Overall, these are inconsistent, lightly weighted switches with an unwanted tactile event. I personally don't like them at all. 4 out of 10. Now, Fnatic has referred to these as quiet without the need for dampeners. And while they are quiet, they still make more noise compared to a true dampened switch. Additionally, as I've said a few times now, the spacebar stabilizer is very rattly, and that the switch installed in my B key has a noticeable spring crunch when pressed slowly. Take a listen. Overall, while I'm glad the sound wasn't completely ignored as an aspect, the scratchy switches and the Thocky-esque sound signature isn't to my taste. 4 out of 10. Now take a listen and enjoy. Now these are scratchy, lightly weighted switches with a high actuation point, so they clearly were not designed for typing in the slightest. Adding to that, they also have an unwanted tactile event in the travel, so they're also poorly designed as a whole. Overall, I'm not the biggest fan of these switches for typing, and I wouldn't recommend them to most people. 4 out of 10. Now, these were also scratchy when used in gaming. Not very surprising, is it? I do have to admit that it wasn't really noticeable in super fast gameplay, which is its only real upside. However, in basically any other game, its scratchiness and inconsistencies were made worse by its unwanted tactile event. Overall, even though these were made for gaming, I did not enjoy my time with them at all, and I certainly would not use them again. 4 out of 10. In conclusion, the keyboard is fairly average, but the switches are appallingly bad. The final score for this keyboard is 33 out of 50 or 66%, which is higher than most given its very good projected reliability and value when compared to the current market. The final score for this switch is 20 out of 50 or 40%, which makes this one of the worst switches I've ever reviewed. And that's it, I'll be showing you a custom keyboard next time maybe. Until then, take care and goodbye.